On a gloomy winter night in 1958, when Billie Holiday stepped up to the microphone in a small recording studio in Manhattan, no one knew that one of music history's greatest mysteries would be born that night. Lady Day recorded only 3 songs that evening. But these weren't ordinary performances. They were confessions containing the deepest secrets of her life, the pain she had never shared with anyone, and perhaps the truths that led to her death. When the recording session ended, the master tape containing these 3 songs was secretly hidden away, and after Billie's death, it mysteriously disappeared. For 65 years, collectors from around the world have been searching for these recordings because they believe the words on that tape could rewrite all of music history. Before you continue listening to this dramatic quest for the lost songs, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because the secrets Billie Holiday kept hidden are far from over. December 23, 1958. Just 2 days before Christmas, the Sound Workshop studio on East Side Manhattan's 47th Street had fallen into silence. This small unnamed studio was typically used for commercial jingles and low-budget projects, but that night it had been rented for a very different purpose. Studio owner Sam Phillips, yes, the cousin of that famous Sam Phillips from New York, knew that night was unusual, because payment for the recording session had been made in cash and no documentation was requested. The person who came identified himself only as Mr. Johnson and said that Billie Holiday would be using the studio for 2 hours. When Billie Holiday arrived at the studio that night, it didn't take Sam Phillips long to recognize her. Lady Day's characteristic posture, slow steps, and that famous gardenia flower in her hair gave her away. However, Billie's appearance shocked Phillips. The powerful presence that once filled stages had given way to the silhouette of an exhausted, sick woman. The old sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. Her voice had become hoarse. But her reason for coming to the studio that night wasn't just to make music, it was to hold a kind of confession session. Phillips could never forget Billie saying, "Tonight I'm going to tell everything." Only 2 other people were with Lady Day that night, Marcus Williams on piano and Eddie Coleman on bass. These 2 musicians were among Billie's few loyal friends in her final period, and were among the rare people who knew her true state. Williams later recounted that night, confessing that before recording, Billie had told him, "Marcus, what I'm going to say tonight could kill me, but I can't take it anymore." These words showed how critical that night was. Lady Day wasn't just singing anymore. She was also lifting the heaviest burdens of her 43-year life from her shoulders. The first song was titled "Secrets in the Dark" and began with lyrics that Billie Holiday had written herself. In this song, Lady Day talked about the sexual abuse from her childhood, but she wasn't just telling her own experiences. She was also describing how other young girls in the music industry had suffered similar traumas. The most striking part of the song was when she named well-known record company executives and detailed how they treated young female artists. Sam Phillips, listening to this performance from behind the studio glass, had checked multiple times to make sure the recording equipment was running, because he understood the historical value of these words. In the song, Billie recounted the horrible experience she had at Columbia Records in 1935 when she was 20 years old. She described what happened in record company boss John Hammond's office, how she was forced to sing, and the threats she received in return. She repeated Hammond's words, "If you don't come with me tonight, your career ends here," and told how dirty she felt after this incident. But the most shocking part was when she said how common such behavior was in the music industry, and that other female artists faced similar pressures. Lady Day also explained in this song how the FBI used her as blackmail material. Recording this song took about 25 minutes because Billie kept stopping and breaking into tears. While Marcus Williams continued playing the piano, he could hear Lady Day's tears reaching the microphone. Sam Phillips, describing that night, said, "I had never heard anything like it in my life. This wasn't just a song, it was a woman's soul crying out." When the song ended, complete silence dominated the studio, and everyone wondered how Billie had found the courage to speak these truths. The second song, "The Men Who Destroyed Me," began with a much more personal and vengeful tone. In this song, Billie Holiday enumerated the men in her life one by one: her father, her lovers, her managers, and even her musician friends. But the most surprising part was when she exposed the true faces of famous jazz musicians. Lady Day told in this song how Miles Davis had used and discarded her, how Charlie Parker had been two-faced toward her, and how Dizzy Gillespie had spread gossip behind her back. When Sam Phillips heard these names, he considered stopping the recording equipment because these revelations could turn music history upside down. The most dramatic part of the song was when she described her experiences with Louis McKay, her last love relationship. She detailed how McKay had beaten her, stolen her money, and made her more addicted to drugs. But the most striking claim was that McKay had collaborated with the FBI, reporting Billie's every move to agents. Lady Day confessed in this song, "The man I loved most sold me to the government," revealing one of the biggest betrayals in her life. This revelation deeply shook the listeners, because McKay was still the only person beside Billie at that time who was thought to be protecting her. At the end of the song, Billie gave a powerful message saying, "All these men destroyed me, but none of them could silence my voice." These words were also a manifesto of rebellion. Lady Day was declaring that she would no longer be anyone's victim, that she would tell the truth, and that she accepted the price she would pay for it. Marcus Williams later said that during the recording of this song, the power in Billie's voice had returned, as if the spirit of the old Lady Day had come back to her. This song was also a document of Billie Holiday's war against the patriarchal structure in the music industry. The final song, Strange Truth, was both the most personal and the most dangerous. In this song, Billie Holiday told the real story behind her famous song Strange Fruit. She explained that the song wasn't just an anti-racism protest song, but also a deep confession where she processed her own traumas. The story of the lynched black men mentioned in Strange Fruit wasn't just a general social criticism, but also told the horrible events that happened to her own father. She detailed how Clarence Holiday really died, who was involved in this death, and how this truth had frightened her for years. Lady Day also explained in this song how the FBI had targeted her for singing Strange Fruit, how Harry Anslinger's anti-drug unit had followed her, and how they had turned her life into hell. But the most shocking revelation was that FBI agents had forced her to use drugs. Billie confessed that agents had told her either you stay quiet or we'll make you quiet, and had used her drug addiction as a weapon. This revelation exposed the political atmosphere of that era and the pressure put on black artists. At the end of the song, Billie said she knew what would happen to her if these recordings came to light. She finished the song with the words, "I might die for telling these truths, but at least the truth will remain." Sam Phillips later said that when he heard these words, his hair stood on end, as if he was listening to a woman's last will. Indeed, Billie Holiday would lose her life about 6 months after these recordings, on July 17, 1959. This coincidence was an important clue, explaining why the recordings were immediately hidden and later disappeared. Recording the 3 songs took a total of 4 hours, and it was past midnight. As Billie Holiday left the studio, she told Sam Phillips, "Don't give these recordings to anyone. If something happens to me, keep them in a safe place." Phillips took this instruction seriously, and put the master tape in the studio's security safe. However, when he came to the studio the next morning, he found that the safe had been forced open, and the tape had been stolen. The theft had been done professionally, the security system had been disabled, and only that tape had been taken. This situation showed Phillips how dangerous the content of the tape was. Phillips hadn't gone to the police because he remembered Billie's warnings. Lady Day had told him, "If these recordings fall into the wrong hands, not only me but you too will be in danger." Indeed, people around Billie Holiday were constantly under pressure during that period. FBI agents regularly questioned musicians, technicians, and studio owners who worked with Lady Day. When Phillips understood this situation, he began to think that the theft of the tape might have been an FBI operation. But what was really surprising was that a few days later, Mr. Johnson came to the studio and warned Phillips nothing happened that night. Nobody came. Despite these threats, Phillips could never forget that night, and wondered for years whether copies of these recordings existed elsewhere. In a 1960s interview, he described that night as the most frightening but also the most important night of my life. Sam Phillips also suspected the connection between these recordings and Billie Holiday's death. There had been nurses who heard Lady Day say, "My songs are lost, the truths are lost," just days before her death in the hospital. These words confirmed Phillips's suspicions. The first person to learn about the existence of Billie Holiday's lost songs after her death was music collector William P. Gottlieb. Gottlieb had heard Sam Phillips's story in the 1960s and decided to find these recordings. But when his research began, he encountered an unexpected reality. Phillips's studio had burned down in a mysterious fire just a few months after the lost songs. Although the fire investigation stated it was an electrical contact, Phillips's security safe where the recordings were stored had also been damaged. This situation increased Gottlieb's suspicions and made him think that the theft of the tape wasn't a random burglary. In the 1970s, other collectors who pursued the lost songs included famous names from the music industry like Jerry Wexler and Ahmet Ertegun. However, their research had also been fruitless. Ertegun later said in an interview, "We were looking for Billie's lost songs, but every clue led us in the wrong direction, as if someone was deliberately leaving false traces." This statement showed that there was an organized effort regarding hiding or destroying the recordings. Collectors occasionally encountered people who claimed to have found copies of these songs, but none of them turned out to be real. The most interesting false lead appeared in 1975. A music store owner in Chicago claimed to have Billie Holiday's lost songs and announced that he wanted to sell them for $50,000. Collectors flocked to the city after hearing the news, but when they listened to the recordings, it turned out they were imitations. Sound technicians determined that the voice in the recordings belonged to another female singer trying to sound like Billie Holiday. This incident showed that as the fame of the lost songs increased, scammers also got involved. But at the same time it revealed how great the demand for these songs was. In the 1980s, the most important development regarding the lost songs came with the confessions of Marcus Williams, who had played piano that night. When Williams reached the age of 78, he stated that he wanted to tell the truth before dying and told that night in detail in an interview he gave to a journalist. According to Williams, Billie Holiday hadn't just recorded 3 songs that night, she had also given long monologues before each song. In these monologues, Lady Day had openly described other dirty secrets in the music industry, political pressures, and her personal traumas. Williams' most striking revelation was that they weren't alone in the studio that night. During the recording session, he had seen some people waiting at the studio's back door. These people looked like FBI agents in civilian clothes and had stayed there until the recording was finished. Williams hadn't told Billie about this situation that night because he didn't want to frighten her more. But thinking about it now, he believed that the presence of those men could be connected to the theft of the tape. This revelation showed how closely the FBI was following Billie Holiday during that period and how dangerous these songs were considered. Williams also talked about an envelope that Billie had given him that night. When the recording session ended, Lady Day had given Marcus a small envelope saying, "If something happens to me, keep this in a safe place." Williams had kept this envelope in his house's basement for 20 years, but during a burglary of his house in 1979, the envelope had also been stolen. He had never learned what was in the envelope, but based on what Billie had said that night, he thought it was probably the written version of the song lyrics. The theft of this envelope wasn't a coincidence either because the thieves had only taken that envelope and a few valuable items from the house. In the early 1990s, advances in sound technology renewed hopes for finding the lost songs. Thanks to digital sound analysis techniques, it became possible to scan all recordings made during that period and detect Billie Holiday's voice. Collectors who heard about this technological development began systematically scanning old studio archives, radio stations, and private collections. However, despite years of research, they couldn't reach any concrete findings. This situation strengthened the theory that the recordings had really been completely destroyed. The most interesting clue that emerged during this period came from an old radio technician. This technician named Charlie Morrison claimed that while working at a radio station in New York in 1958, he had received a strange sound recording late at night. The recording equipment had picked up signals from a nearby studio for unknown reasons that night, and had obtained about 15 minutes of recording. Morrison said he had heard Billie Holiday's voice in part of this recording, but the quality was very poor. Unfortunately, this recording had also been lost during the station's move in the 1970s. When sound technicians examined Morrison's story, they confirmed it was theoretically possible. The radio technology of that era could indeed pick up strong nearby signals. This information created great excitement among collectors because if one radio station had picked up these signals, other stations might have picked them up too. Based on this theory, old radio archives throughout America were scanned in the 1990s, but no recording related to Billie Holiday's performance that night was found in any of them. The biggest development regarding the lost songs in the early 2000s came from Sarah Morrison, the granddaughter of recording engineer John Morrison, who had witnessed that night. After her grandfather's death, while cleaning his house, Sarah discovered a secret compartment in the basement. In this compartment were detailed diaries and notes that her grandfather John had kept about Billie Holiday. The diary described what happened that night, minute by minute, and contained clues about where the recordings were hidden. But the most surprising information was that John Morrison had secretly made a copy of the recordings and kept this copy in a safe place. According to the diary, Morrison had secretly prepared a backup tape when he understood the historical importance of what happened that night. He had left this backup tape in a safety deposit box at a bank in New York, and had written the box number along with the key in his diary using a special code system. Sarah Morrison tried to decode this code, but her grandfather's system was so complex that she needed the help of professional code breakers. When the code was deciphered, the information that emerged was amazing. Morrison had kept the tape in one of the safety deposit boxes at Chase Manhattan Bank. When Sarah Morrison went to the bank with this information, she experienced great disappointment. According to bank records, that numbered safety deposit box had been opened in 1982 because rent fees weren't paid, and its contents had been sold at auction. When auction records were examined, a lot containing old music recordings and documents was found, but it was unknown who had bought this lot. This development both raised and crushed hopes because it was understood that the recordings still existed, but they could now be in the hands of an anonymous collector. In the 2010s, the sharing of some of Billie Holiday's FBI files with the public shed new light on the lost songs. The files clearly showed how closely Harry Anslinger's Federal Narcotics Bureau had followed Lady Day, and how they had interfered with her private life. But the most interesting detail was intelligence reports from the last months of 1958 that Billie Holiday had recorded sensitive information. These reports stated that the target had made sound recordings containing dangerous confessions, and these recordings posed a security risk. The FBI files also showed that people around Billie Holiday during that period were systematically monitored. Everyone who was in the studio that night, including Sam Phillips, Marcus Williams, and even Eddie Coleman, was on the FBI's radar. The files stated that these people's phone conversations were monitored, their homes were watched, and some of them were even interrogated. This information strengthened the theory that the lost songs had been seized by the FBI. The documents also contained vague statements that problematic recordings had been safely disposed of. One of the most striking documents was a report dated one day after Billie Holiday's death. This report stated that the security threat had ended with the target's death, and noted that related materials had been destroyed. This phrase "related materials" could have referred to the lost songs. However, the FBI's attitude on this matter still remained unclear because important parts of the files were still classified and hadn't been shared with the public. This situation brought to mind the possibility that the lost songs might still be kept in government archives. In the 2010s and 2020s, advances in artificial intelligence and sound restoration technology created new hopes for finding the lost songs. Thanks to these technologies, it became possible to reconstruct damaged or incomplete sound recordings, create digital copies from old analog recordings, and even recreate original performances from sound traces. These developments created great excitement among music archaeologists because reaching recordings that previously seemed inaccessible was now theoretically possible. Especially when technology giants like Google and IBM started sound analysis projects, the chance of finding the lost songs increased. Within the scope of these projects, millions of hours of old sound recordings were digitized and algorithms that recognized Billie Holiday's voice characteristics were developed. In 2018, a group of researchers from Stanford University announced that they had mathematically modeled Lady Day's voice signature by analyzing all of Billie Holiday's known recordings. Thanks to this model, it became theoretically possible to find Billie Holiday's unknown recordings by scanning all music archives worldwide. The most exciting result of these technological developments came in 2019. Sound engineers from MIT announced that they had developed an algorithm that could distinguish Billie Holiday's voice from old radio broadcasts. This algorithm scanned thousands of hours of radio recordings from the 1950s and found several suspicious samples. Among these was a very low-quality recording dated 1958, and the algorithm calculated that this belonged to Billie Holiday with 73% probability. However, the recording was so damaged that it wasn't possible to make the lyrics understandable. Still, this development was an important sign showing that the lost songs could still be discovered. The most determined group in searching for the lost songs was a network of private collectors operating worldwide. Among these collectors were millionaire businesspeople, famous musicians, and even government officials. Music legends like Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, and Quincy Jones had also allocated special resources to find these recordings. These collectors weren't just spending money, they were also organizing professional search operations by hiring private detectives, sound technicians, and even former CIA agents. One of the most interesting members of this secret network was a collector with the pseudonym Mr. X, who kept his identity secret. His database contained records of all studios in New York during that period, names of working technicians, and even copies of FBI files. X's theory was that the recordings had been taken by the FBI and kept in secret government archives, and he had collected numerous documents to support this theory. In 2015, a development that created great excitement among collectors occurred. An anonymous seller in London claimed to have one of Billie Holiday's lost songs and announced that he wanted to sell it for $2 million. Collectors who heard the news immediately went to London, but when they examined the recordings, it turned out these were also fake. This incident showed that as the fame of the lost songs increased, scammers also developed more sophisticated methods. The fake recordings had been prepared so well that even some experts were fooled at first listen. In 2020, bass player Eddie Coleman, who died at age 89, made surprising statements about the lost songs in his last interview before death. According to Coleman, not only 3 songs were recorded in the studio that night, but Billie Holiday had also recorded a speech. In this speech, Lady Day said that if something happened to her, she wanted these recordings to reach certain people. Coleman hadn't shared this conversation with anyone for years because he was worried about Billie's safety. Coleman's most striking revelation was about a small piece of paper that Billie had given him when leaving the studio that night. On this paper was written, "If the recordings are lost, call Sarah in Baltimore," with a phone number below it. Coleman had never dared to call this number for years, but when he recently did research, he learned that Sarah Fagan, living in Baltimore, was a distant relative of Billie Holiday. Since Coleman died shortly after sharing this information, he didn't have the opportunity to follow up on this clue. After Coleman's death, music researchers immediately went to Baltimore and found Sarah Fagan. 78-year-old Sarah was Billie Holiday's distant cousin and had occasionally met with Lady Day in the 1950s. According to Sarah's account, Billie had called her at the end of 1958 saying, "I'm going to send you a special package. If something happens to me, keep it in a safe place." The package had indeed come, but Sarah had never opened it and had kept it in the basement for 60 years. When researchers opened this package, they found 3 empty cassette boxes and a note saying real recordings are in a safe place. In 2023, the biggest development regarding the lost songs came unexpectedly from France. Marcel Dubois, a former radio technician living in Paris, found old recording tapes in his grandfather's chest while cleaning his house. On one of these tapes was written BH mixed December 1958 inches, and Dubois wondered what this meant. When he listened to the recordings, he realized they belonged to Billie Holiday, but he didn't recognize the songs. When Dubois took these recordings to music experts, it turned out they could be at least one of the lost songs. When sound analysis experts examined the recordings, they confirmed that the voice really belonged to Billie Holiday. However, the quality of the recordings was very low, and the lyrics couldn't be fully understood. Still, this discovery was the strongest evidence showing that the lost songs still existed. How Marcel's grandfather came to have these recordings remained a complete mystery. According to Marcel's research, his grandfather had worked at a radio station in Paris in the 1950s and recorded broadcasts from America. These recordings were probably obtained by chance during that period. This discovery created great excitement worldwide, and efforts to find the lost songs accelerated again. Sound restoration experts began cleaning and making the Paris recordings understandable. Initial results were promising, and it was understood that at least part of the recordings could be made readable. However, the complete restoration process would take at least 2 years, and the content of the recordings was kept secret during this time. This development also mobilized collectors in other countries, and similar searches began again worldwide. As of today, the complete recordings of Billie Holiday's lost 3 songs still haven't been found. Although the discovery in Paris is promising, the real content of these recordings hasn't been revealed yet. Sound restoration work continues, and experts indicate they can share the first results by the end of 2025. During this process, technological developments also don't stop, and more sophisticated sound analysis tools are being developed every day. The search for lost songs has now moved beyond being just a hobby for collectors and has become an academic research field. Music archaeology departments have been opened at various universities, and systematic studies are being conducted to find these recordings. With the development of artificial intelligence technology, it may be possible to recreate even the missing parts of these songs in the future. Algorithms that learn Billie Holiday's voice characteristics can predict how the lost songs were performed and complete the missing parts. The most interesting aspect of this search is that it not only seeks to find the recordings, but also reveals new information about the music industry of the 1950s, FBI pressures, and the difficulties faced by female artists. Each new clue illuminates the dark side of that era a little more and exposes the systematic pressure that Billie Holiday experienced. Whether the lost songs will ever be found is uncertain, but even the process of searching for them is helping to rewrite our music history. Perhaps these recordings will never be found, perhaps they're still hidden in FBI archives, or perhaps they really were destroyed. But this 65-year search for the truths that Billie Holiday spoke that night shows how powerful her voice was, and why this power frightened some people. Lady Day's lost songs aren't just 3 pieces of music, they're also symbols of a woman's courage, her will to tell the truth, and her stand against the system, and that's why the search continues.